All right, welcome in. With Cowboys training camp less than 2 weeks away, Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott addressed reporters after his camp. What he said is all good, and maybe you can see a path to the Super Bowl if you squint. What do you think? But not only does he give you the gold on George Pickens in here, but also said you can't compare this year to last year with CeeDee Lamb now that that holdout is a thing of the past. Let's do this.
The only thing else I got to say is, how about them Cowboys? Yeah!
Alrighty, I'm Gavin Dawson from 105.3 The Fan, the Cowboys flagship station in Dallas-Fort Worth. And joining me, as always, is my buddy, the former all-academic SEC lineman from Kentucky, New Bear. How the hell are you, bud?
Feeling good. Hopefully I sound as good as I look.
Oh, man, you look good and you sound great, man. The new microphone is killing it. So welcome into How About Wow, where every day we talk about the Cowboys getting back to the glory days. It's brought to you by Harbor Lights. Go to harborenterprisesllc.com. And it's also brought to you by Elements Massage in Frisco, the two locations, the Star and Main Street there by the soccer stadium. We have Dak updating all of the most important storylines here, just 12 days till Oxnard. And so much, New Bear, as you know, is writing on, will Dak Prescott plus George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb return this offense to 2023 levels of explosiveness and production? So let's get you the update here as we jump into the share screen. There's some kids enjoying the Prescott camp. And if you don't know, every year Dak takes his guys, not the kids, his offensive skill players on a retreat somewhere off site. They get to practice and they get to know each other better. It's basically like peak team bonding, right, with Dak Prescott leading the way. So the first clip here is an answer to a question from Cowboys beat reporter Todd Archer of ESPN asking how that camp went this time around. Let's do this.
Phenomenal. Went back to a place that we're familiar with, that we were a couple years ago in Georgia. That made the grounds and the efficiency outstanding, but then the commitment from the guys, one showing up, and then their energy and commitment to growing what Shadi's talked about, the brotherhood, and not just, us hanging out, but actually diving into some language, some conversation, some whys, some guys' whys. The throwing was outstanding, but that time off the field was just as important and as beneficial as any trip has been.
I mean, from a corporate leadership standpoint, wouldn't it be just an absolute dream come true, New Bear, to have a guy like Dak Prescott be your point man? As a general manager or a manager, you want to install this culture stuff. You want to get into guys' why so they can bond and get this chemistry. And here's Dak, like the picture perfect dude. Like, yeah, I'm going to rent a private plane. I'm going to take him across the country. We'll get a cabin. We'll spend 72 hours practicing ball and getting to know each other.
The man has a future in public relations if he wants it. I mean, I imagine whenever he decides to hang him up, and all health considered, hopefully that's not for a long time, and he's slinging that rock around and leading this team to dubs for a good minute. And if he ever does want to go into it, I mean, corporate speaking, the different engagements, the motivational stuff, particularly, in the day and age we have with Twitter and all the different things, refuse to call it X, the future for him off the field, Walter Payton Man of the Year, is as bright as it's ever been on the field for sure. He's one of the special ones.
He is, man. I don't know what that's worth when it comes to winning, but I love it. I think it's an ideal work environment. Like Tom Brady was a jerk. Patrick Mahomes is kind of a meathead. He's just always drinking beer and eating Pop-Tarts and eating ice cream cones. The guy is just. That's not an ideal leader. So I think a lot of the discussion around North Texas.
He also let Antonio Brown's crazy ass move in with him. Tom Brady was going to do whatever it took to win. Yeah. You can look at this a number of different
whatever it took.
If you win, then you're drinking the Kool-Aid. That's one thing. If you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you go out and hang up a crooked number on the wrong side of the win-loss docket, then it's a different conversation. Across every headline on every platform and every channel. Yeah. And what you have to really love about this is that everything that he talks builds into the next thing, which is about how it all adds up to winning.
Yeah. I do think this gives you like insulation. If you can establish a culture like this. It gives you insulation from worst case scenario, which is like, last year when the Eagles and Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown were seeing eye to eye. If those guys weren't awesome leaders, maybe that tears their season apart and they collapse just like it happened in 2023. You know what I'm saying? And I think the smart leaders understand, hey, this isn't going to make you throw it better or run it faster or catch it better. But the human relationship dynamics, if you know people deeper, you're more likely to care about them. It's like a military, like foxhole mentality. And maybe if you care about them, you'll dig a little bit deeper to make sure your guys come out on top.
Well, we're already seeing the dividends being paid with George Pickens, and I know there's another clip that you want to play where he talks about the relationship. Do you want to play that before I speak? Because it's one of those things that having watched that for 3 years here in Pittsburgh, everyone was so concerned. Don't let the door hit you, and all the vitriol that was spewed, not only just on his way out of town, but all the way through the more recent thing where they tried to paint him in an ugly light with the camp, which was a misunderstanding, speaking of public relations. But if you got the clip queued up, let's hear from Dak.
Pickens, what did you kind of learn about George, just kind of as he kind of got to learn that brotherhood and be with you guys?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, that's a guy that loves football. I mean, the guy's telling me about my college days, and you don't know about Mississippi State college days unless you're a football guy, right? And sure, he's from Alabama, and that's right there in that region. But I mean, players that I played with, guys from his region, that right there, that knowledge, that involvement, that shows you a guy loves football. And that, to me, that deletes a lot of things that you've heard in the past about him. Great dude, loves his teammates, and excited as hell for this season. I know he is. I know he's happy to be in a fresh new spot, and I'm excited for what he's going to do for us.
Yeah, a couple different talking points there, New Bear. I think, how much does loving football matter to you? I would love to get your player perspective on that. To me, it's massive. I don't think you can reach the top if you don't love it. You can be very, very good as a natural.
You can't be the captain. You can't be the best player. You can be a contributor. You can be a key guy, but you can't be the guy. What he's talking about there is the South. Football is a religion. It's faith, family, football, and it's not necessarily in that order. And when you look at geographically from Texas to Florida, and you talk about him being a Louisiana guy into Mississippi State, and the other from crossing state lines the other way, right, from Alabama to Georgia, with Pickens being a Hoover kid, and you get some of these folks, like, you don't have to be from the same part of the bayou or the same part of the South. Being from the South matters. The way that these guys think about ball, think about life, think about everything in between and all the connective tissue that's brought them to where they are. And then when you put them in that setting and you remove all the noise and you really allow them to just dig in literally and figuratively to what they're doing on the field, and then how they're getting to know each other better off, like you were talking about, that's where you go find that little extra something to dig in when you don't feel like you have anything left to give.
Yeah. I love this kind of stuff. I think when you're watching the game, and for George Pickens, that's 9 years ago. What is he right now? 24 years old. That 9 years ago was the end of Dak's career, right? In 2015. So, I mean, you're going back into some pretty early days. And I assume George Pickens just loved so much football back then. He was watching it, understood all the guys. And then to have the recall, I do think that passion, caring about the game, that really matters. And I hope that the Cowboys, are going to continue to prioritize that, because they ran into back-to-backers there with Mozzie Smith and Tyler Guyton. Guys, I just don't know if they watch football or love the game that much. Here's more from Dak. How long is it going to take for you to get on the same page with your guys?
Not long. As I said, having dealt with trades before, whether it been Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, I mean, go turn on that guy's tape. He's getting separation. He's got separation. Even when he's not getting the ball at times, and hell, when he doesn't have separation, he's still making the catches. It's not going to be hard. For me, it's about getting that ball near that guy and letting him go beat George Pickens, and you go turn on the tape. He's great at doing that.
Man, I so hope that that's exactly how this plays out, New Bear. There's a couple of things, like, how hard is it to learn that trust in a wide receiver, And then with Dak's picks, they so often happen when an extra linebacker or safety is lurking. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think he's great at like tracking all of the players downfield and finding that pocket. So I actually, even though he's going into his 10th year, I think this is something that Dak needs to add and prove to everybody that he can come and meet the George Pickens opportunity here on his end.
The Amari Cooper parallels are really interesting because he was 24 years old, like George Pickens. It's the same type of timeline, and you're coming from a very dysfunctional place, Oakland, Pittsburgh, respectively, and you're ultimately going to be catching balls from the same guy, which is pretty cool. I mean, Amari Cooper is a pro's pro. He's a professional receiver. Amari Cooper from what you wake up and get out of bed with, not George Pickens. This is the opportunity. Everything that Dak is doing, everything that's going into this summer of good vibes only is about if George Pickens can figure out what his true ceiling really is.
Yeah, and I know that George Pickens has the ability to go downfield. There's going to be an opportunity there. Dak has been good at that, even with much lesser players downfield. Compare and contrast the difference of Amari Cooper's game to George Pickens. Like, could you have two completely different wide receivers by style? I don't know. And I thought Amari was a great fit for Dak because of how quickly he could cut and be open way before the defensive back had an opportunity to recover. And that's why, while Amari was healthy, he had some tremendous success with Prescott.
Well, another word we have to bring up here is trust. There's been a lot of stuff trending lately at Ferg season, and a lot of people who are really on the Jake Ferguson train, not just for the sake of Jake Ferguson, but because of what GP does for him too. Like, you've heard me talk these past few weeks about how CeeDee on one side, Pickens on the other, or if you line them up and you put Fergie by himself on the backside, then there's going to be a real opportunity for this guy to become a seam stretching tight end and to really put all of his athletic attributes on display. And when you watch a lot of healthy Jake Ferguson trust, and I don't think it's not seeing coverage. I don't think it's not understanding what the defense is doing post snap. I think it's Dak trusting Jake that if I put this ball in a tight spot, if I make a back shoulder throw over the middle between two or three guys, he's the only one who really has a chance to catch it. And 6'5", 250 with all that crazy bounce when he's healthy, he's going to figure out a way to come down with it or make sure no one else does.
I love it. Okay, more from Dak Prescott. Did a great media session after his camp with the kids here, brought to you by Albertsons and Tom Thumb and a bunch of different sponsors. But here's Dak Prescott talking about the difference in chemistry with CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, not even comparable. It's not even comparable to last year. And credit that this past trip that we just had. I mean, for one, you got to credit the offseason and the lack of the contract negotiation, right? So he even alluded to that, right? Just in some conversations of how much better it feels, right? Of him being involved, right? And it's business. That last year was nothing personal from anybody, but he wanted to be involved, right? He almost couldn't. That just what it's doing for him, his energy, his leadership, his growth. Yeah, you can't even compare the two.
Man, his leadership and his growth, you can't even compare the two. I love hearing that. I think CeeDee Lamb's immaturity during his rookie contract was embarrassing at times, especially the playoff game against Green Bay where it looked like he was giving up on like the first or second series. I love guys that love to win, but not when it makes the sideline look unprofessional. I don't know if you feel the same way. Maybe I'm showing my age here. But no, I just felt like that was a horrible look.
No, that's something that was a real problem here, where you had one receiver opposite George Pickens and then George Pickens himself. And there were actually times in games where if one or the other was getting their number called with the game on the line, the other one was just quitting on the play and even giving you one of these. And Pickens actually walked off the field at one point when he didn't get the play run for him with the game on the line, and it was successful. And there's a front-running element to this, and that's the one red flag. That's the one trigger word. That's the one challenging part of this, is that all the naysayers and all the negativity, it has merit. It's not just a bunch of noise, jealous, immature, ungrateful fans, team, players around him. They were tired of him. They were not upset that he's in Dallas, and I think they would have liked to have gotten a little bit more, especially because he was a 2 and he would have been a 1 without the ACL, and they only get a 3 in return, which they would have gotten anyway, compensatory had they let him walk at the end of the year. But they drew a line in the sand and said, look, we're willing to take less, and we're willing to take the exact same thing we would get anyway, because it's addition by subtraction. What Dallas believes and what they have to believe in and what they have to go all in on is getting the best version of George Pickens, because CeeDee Lamb, and oh, by the way, can we just all for a second be immature and have a really hard time and show up 15 times and catch 100 back for half the year? Because, CeeDee Lamb having a hard time is still Pro Bowl, All-Pro, one of the best to do it. And to think about him being fresh, clear, not having that weight that he's carrying around, and to think about him having now a running buddy, and to have him be the big brother in this situation, right? It's not the other way around like it has been at other points in his career where he was the young buck on the come up. Now he's the voice of reason. Mm-hmm. Now he's able to say, look, I've been through this shit too. Here's how I don't want you to do what I did. Here's how I want to see you grow. And they can push each other just as hard off the field as they do in between the lines.
Sometimes that responsibility is all a guy needs to make that shift from younger brother to older brother, and if that's the case, like, with CeeDee Lamb being here, I do wonder how they can look at what Dak said right there and not feel any more urgency to get a Micah Parsons contract done. Like, Dak's telling you right now, it's hard to get on the same page, even with star players that you've had on your team for a half decade, if they're going to miss an off season.
This is what I've been chirping about. I can't stand knowing what's going to happen. We all know what's going to happen, right? If TJ Watt stays in Pittsburgh, he's going to get $1 more than Myles Garrett. If Micah Parsons stays in Dallas, it's how much? It's how many million dollars more. And the fact that they're not, because what you're doing now is you're taking away from Jack Sanborn, from Kenneth Murray. You're taking away from Mozzie Smith. All these other guys who have questions are depending on you to be there. And, if you're Micah Parsons right now, I love all the tweets. I love all the social, all the sand, all the workouts, all the blood, sweat, and tears you guys are putting in. But at the end of the day, there's still this thing lurking over everyone's head that there's a chance that he might not be here, or he might miss part of it. Or at the very least, he's going to be a distraction because he's going to be standing on the sidelines doing push-ups with a bucket hat on instead of having his actual hat on, bucking dudes in drills.
I love bucket hat season. Every training camp, just 3 weeks until the G-Bag Nation is there. New Bear, I think you're going to be at Steelers camp. You got to join me in Oxnard here as well. But let's get a little bit more of what Dak had to say about his wide receivers. Here he was talking about what he has observed in this Starsky and Hutch, Lamb and Pickens dynamic in his first offseason. Here we go. Oh, crap. Forgot to turn the audio up. Here we go. And now it's going to work.
Sure. That might be the best part about it. That's two guys that want the other guy to succeed just as much. That is literally the best part about those two men, is seeing it firsthand, just them two hanging out, and me, the bystander. I go in the house, purposely for a little bit, and just peeking at them. They love each other. They love each other's company. They love each other's game. They're just watch them on the field, them talking to each other, to them just being one-on-one, like I said, on the porch. They're going to push each other. And to be the guy that gets to get them the ball, it's exciting as hell, because you can turn on the OTA tapes, and one of the guys, the ball's in the air, and the other one's got his hands up celebrating already. That we just got to continue to grow that and continue to make sure that that's trending the right way.
So listening to Dak say that, and the conversation that we just had, New Bear, what do you think happens the first time they hit adversity? They have a bad loss. They only score 9 points. Collectively, they have 60 yards receiving. Where will this story go when invariably you hit adversity in an NFL season?
We get the answer before that. We get the answer when CD has 13 for 169 and 3, and Pickens has 1 for 13 and nada. We get the answer when they win and Pickens doesn't have a big role in it, or vice versa. Because right now, CD is saying the same thing. There's no wide receiver 1, no wide receiver 2, no 1A, 1B. We're both ones, and we're going to act like it. They're going to expect to be open on every play. They're going to expect to get the ball on every play. And whoever gets the ball, they're going to go celebrate, because we're all in the video together. And when you win, that's easy to say. When you win, that's easy to do. To your point, if they go out and they lose, and it's a 35-34 Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night, awesome, everybody wake up for Sports Center type of game, I think you're fine. What would be shocking to see is this team go out and score 9 points. Like Tom Brady, they said we're only going to score 14, right? Like before the Super Bowl, that kind of thing. Like this offense is set up to be that explosive week in and week out. So what you're telling me is that if they go out and they have a 9-point game, you're talking about turnovers. You're talking about game script gone, playing behind the chains, being forced to throw early and often, and Dak having a really ugly number, maybe even being benched for his own safety because they're getting beat up front. And I think if you think about how that kind of game plays out, there's going to be a bunch of other, mitigating factors. And then at the end, you just hope it's one of those things where you can just kind of nuke the film because it's so bad that there's almost nothing you can learn from watching it.
I mean, part of me wants to say that is coming. Part of me wants to say, Newberry, you could give Dak Jamar Chase on top of what they already have. And if you put him against good defenses that can clog and cover, it will neuter their offense. Part of me wants to say the only reason you feel that strongly about who's going to stop the Cowboys offense is because they got to play in the most depressed era of NFC East football. You know what I'm saying? Like you got to beat up and then on top of that, like their non-conference schedule just kept falling easy. Oh, here's the AFC East when they're atrocious. Kellen Moore's first year. Go ahead and pretend like you're the best OC in the world for the first month. And then boom, reality hits you in the face. Next thing you know, Dak's hurt and your season's down the tubes. So I don't know. I hope you're right. I hope that CeeDee plus George Pickens will make this team go out there and perform well because you have Philadelphia early, you have Chicago early, I think you have Denver week 7 or 8. Like you're going to see some of the best 5 defenses in the NFL here in the first 6 weeks.
One of the big things, though, perhaps the biggest thing, is Dak, because it's not about Schottenheimer versus Tomlin or Jerry Jones versus the Rooneys. It's about having an adult under center. George Pickens never had a grown-up in the huddle with him. George Pickens never had an NFL starting caliber quarterback in the huddle with him. Justin Fields, the closest to it, and almost everybody thinks he's just going to go to New York and fall on his face for a third time. And
you think Fields is better than Russell Wilson?
Well, based on where he was in his career and also how they neutered him once him and Artie started fighting, and all the rumors and he said, she said about what was or was not allowed to happen at the line of scrimmage. Look, you saw what happened. I mean, we all knew you had to put Russ in and see if he could still throw moonballs because you had George Pickens and the offense was predictable because they weren't going to open it up because they didn't trust Fields. And on that first night, we played the highlights a few weeks ago and Pickens went nuts. They beat Aaron Rodgers. They looked like a pro team. And I'm saying that because they were doing things that other pro teams do. And then you fast forward a few weeks and all of a sudden we're not supposed to throw the ball in the middle field. All of a sudden we're not supposed to change play at the line. There was a lot of nonsense that happened at the end of their 5-game losing streak and ultimately going into the playoffs and really looking like they didn't belong again. And
that's crazy.
A lot of that
going up against an offense that's not going to pass the ball in the middle of the field, I think I could DC my way to a win there, New Bear.
Yeah, and what's really challenging about it is, Russ is one of those guys who holds the ball too long. Fields guilty of the same way, and they had offensive line issues. What they also had was Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. What they also had was Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. They had other answers for not having a wide receiver too. And oh, by the way, they had George Pickens, just like you guys had CeeDee out there, 185 targets, 135 catches, 1,700 plus yards, and the crazy season that he had in 2023. What I'm really focused on here is that George Pickens is a guy who has to respect authority. Like he's not just walking in the door and because you're the coach, he's going to do what you say. Because you're the quarterback, he's going to run what you call and play the way that you expect him to play. He's one of those guys, and this younger generation, it's not just Gen Z is the worst kind of thing, but it's one of those things where you really have to you have to give respect to get respect, like Tony Soprano said, right? And Pickens, to his quit on plays, Pickens to his fault, if he knew he was going to be taken out of the route or it was a half field read, he would jog across the field during games, and it cost them games. It cost them interceptions. There was a fumble. It was kind of like Cam Newton in the Super Bowl where he just kind of watched the ball bouncing around and didn't even make an effort after it was picked up and being run back. by the other team. And look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The things he did, even there's stuff we don't know, because if he showed up late so much and he was missing buses or doing all these other things, then he should have been suspended. Beyond the fines and all the things that happened, Tomlin should have sat his ass down for games if it was really as bad as they say it is. But if you just went on what you saw when the red light was on, when the bright lights were shining, and he was taking plays off, that's why I wrote what I wrote when he left. That's why I'm so excited coming out the opposite end, because of everything Dak Prescott is. Dak Prescott has his respect. I also think, because of what he sees in Joe Milton's future, that if Dak were to go down, George would be one of those guys who would say, I got to step up and pick this guy up. I think it's a different deal with the quarterback room in Dallas than anything he had here, especially because as much as Russ is probably going to be a Hall of Famer, like Eli Manning is going to be a Hall of Famer, because the stats, the awards, the Pro Bowls, the All-Pros, the Super Bowl rings, it just is what it is. You can't tell the story of professional football during his era without him in it, so he gets in. He was a living, walking meme entourage for the brand, Ciara's husband. He wasn't let Russ cook. He wasn't Russ of, 5, 8, 10 years ago, when the great debate was what would happen if we were holding Russ back. And then when we let him put up numbers, all he did was put up numbers and win games and go to the playoffs every year and give him a chance. He wasn't that guy anymore. He had enough to win with him, not because of him. And then they took that away. And that's not the case in Dallas. Dak is the $60 million man. Dak, he doesn't just have the keys he might as well be the key. Like it's a different deal when you walk into the huddle and you go, I'm going to do whatever this guy says.
So your belief is that dynamic for Dak is going to make him a better player than he's ever been as well? George Pickens?
Yeah, and it's a two-way street, because now Dak, who loves go balls, Dak, who is looking at this thing and saying, that dude doesn't even have to be open. You hear him talk about how he gets separation and you see it on film, and then how even if he doesn't have separation, he makes those plays like no one else can. That's the element that's different between him and CeeDee. Like CeeDee, for all of his professional wide receiver one stuff, George Pickens is going to the Matrix. I mean, George Pickens, like you said, George Pickens is making Odell Beckham catches at 6'4". George Pickens is making Odell Beckham catches, with the go-go gadget Megatron arms and wingspan and stuff. So, he's one of one from a traits perspective. He's also one of one from might be that crazy. And what it takes is a village, right? It takes the star. It takes the quarterback. It takes the environment around him with a big brother that he respects. Remember, he didn't come in and have prime Big Ben. He didn't come in and have Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and the Killer Bees and that previous era of Pittsburgh Steelers football. And he was basically being tasked to use a very limited amount of his ability to then go achieve the ultimate amount. I mean, his 1,100-yard season was arguably the most difficult 1,100-yard season of all time. When you look at the tape and you look at the route tree and everything that goes into, him putting up the numbers that he did, in spite of the way that they did business here in the 4-1-2. And
he's incredible, man. He really is. And, I'm an advocate for Dak, I feel like, at this point in his career. I do think he's good enough to win a Super Bowl. I just think that he needs more help in the form of George Pickens equivalents at left tackle and running back.
Sure. The running back room is, we were talking about this earlier today, right? When we were just getting really excited and ramped up to get into the studio. I was looking at a fake like a fantasy roster, just like Pickens, Fergie, CeeDee. And then you're just like, if they get anything from this running back room that can threaten the defense and make them respect play action, it's a wrap. And then you go, okay, what about left tackle? Okay, what about, and then you go, well, the hip bone's connected to the leg bone. Like it's all related, right? I mean,
it'll be good enough. If you have a great runner, it'll be good enough.
When you look back at Emmitt Smith, if Emmitt Smith would have started his career where he ended it in Arizona, we're not talking about that dude the same way, right? No. The line was great. Emmitt was great. They made each other better. Irvin was great. Harper was really good at what he was asked to do. They made each other. Novacek, all those things existed together, and they didn't in Pittsburgh. It's an impossible and really incomplete and kind of ridiculous thing to look at a young man who's thrown into a situation where he not only did he do things wrong, but when he did, he wasn't disciplined. I have to believe Dak pulled him aside at the retreat and said, that shit's not going to fly here. I also have to believe that George Pickens came to him hat in hand and said, whatever you need from me for.
All right, we'll get one more cut here from Dak Prescott. More How About Wow in just a minute. Let us take 15 seconds here to tell you just a little bit about our friends at Elements Massage in Frisco. Next time you're in Frisco, see why Elements Massage is trusted by all the big hitters in North Texas for therapeutic massage and holistic wellness. The 2 locations in Frisco at the Star and on Main next to the soccer stadium. Tell them we sent you, and you'll save on your first 1-hour massage and experience self-care for whole body well-being. That is at Elements Massage. This is How About Wow, and this here is Dak Prescott talking about his health 12 days till camp.
I'm healthy. I'll be full go for camp. I'm healthy. Yeah, look, I think soon here I'll probably get an official sign off from Doc, but I'm healthy.
You mentioned Shabby earlier. What do you think of Shabby's tattoos?
Yeah, I'm healthy.
I mean, what else is he
I don't know. Yeah, right. I think he's about 80% of the athlete that he used to be, and I just hope that another injury doesn't happen. But I think he is probably also, along with that, the most injury-prone quarterback in the NFL, maybe this side of Joe Burrow.
Trevor Lawrence. I mean, there's a few guys out there who.
Tua.
Anthony Richardson, whose career might be over before it ever gets started. He's
like top 5 most injury-prone.
Yeah. Well, when when your hamstring rips off the bone and nobody touches you, that's concerning. I'd be remiss if we didn't just quick hit. He's such a big mental health advocate. I said what I said in the previous little bit because Dak is so in tune with what is required to be a leader today. There's no more two-a-days for all intents and purposes. Modern football is a completely different game. And it's all the jokes about the quarterback strike zone and how no one gets to hit anymore. Anything you do is a foul, and don't even think about breathing on Mahomes. These guys admitting post-game that they pulled up because they didn't want to get fined. And so Mahomes is taking advantage of that and sneaking around, for 7 or 8 more yards on the sidelines. But Dak understands that. And Dak, I think, is pouring himself into – look, they're kids to him. You talk about CeeDee being a big brother and maybe being a year or 2 older than the younger brother in George Pickens. Dak's a vet. This is year 10, right? Dak is looking at what he went through last year. This isn't the turf monster. This isn't an ACL. It's literally untouched, and that might be the end of it. If you can't come back from that stuff and you're a paper mache quarterback, like we can have you protected in the pocket and you still can't hold up, then here comes Joe Milton. Everybody hold your breath, right? So, thinking about, I said, what else is he going to say? Aaron Rodgers was talking about playing, 4-6 months after a torn Achilles. He was saying that so that he would get the trainers to push him as hard as he could, so that mentally he was feeding his body, because that's the thing. It's that there's science that proves, this. Your body doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Positive
you visualize it. Yeah. And I'm a big believer in it, man. Like the visualization, what the mind seeks, it will find. What the mind truly believes. It's like the power of the secret stuff. Oprah used to talk about this on her couch like 20 years ago. And you get off into like mystical existential land, but there's something to it, man. There really is. It's why rich people ultimately find rich jobs. It's not just the nepotism. It's that they think of themselves as, I should be at the top of the food chain or the world's not right. So if you think of yourself as I should be healthy, I think it gives you a better chance. I just feel like coming back from that injury, and I had a similar surgery at total ankle reconstruction, it just throws everything out of balance. And you know, from working out and being a fitness guy and an athlete yourself, once you have one weak link in the chain, everything has to compensate. And now you're not a human machine that's built to be bipedal doing its thing in perfect balance. Now you got a little hitch in your giddy up, and over time it's dinging your hip, or it's dinging the backside of your knee on the opposite side. It's just one thing after another. And that's why he's had calf, he's had shoulder, he's had hamstring. It's all in the ground up going through that throwing motion that's straining as a result of his foot not working the way that it used to.
Yeah, I mean, this is the reverse of the conversation we were having about guys like Ravel and Overshone, right? Where maybe that injury is what gets them right because they've never had to really train their body at that intimate level, because that's what it is. Like, you're getting to know, for me, my left arm's a little bit shorter than my right arm because of some injuries I had when my growth plates were still open, and, breaking the big bone clean through and then jamming the growth plate together. And it's one of those things where over time it affected my shoulder, right? And it affects your elbow. And at the end of my college career, I mean, I was basically like the one-arm man out there with one of those Jake Watt or TJ Watt. What is wrong with me? JJ Watt, thingamajigs on. And you go through that process, whether it's the top half or the bottom half, and it really seems to only be hockey players who can figure this shit out, right? Doesn't matter what happens to them, but they'll pick their teeth up off the ice and glue them back in. But when you're talking about all the factors that go into what Dak is looking at, it's remaking his body first and foremost, core work, pliability. I mean, he's probably, I want to know, I want to see him on a scale in Oxnard. Is he 208? Is he 212? What really is he? Because at the end of time, what did Tom Brady really weigh? When Tom Brady took off his helmet and shoulder pads, I mean, he was not the same dude. All the plastic surgery jokes aside, he chugging beer and eating cheeseburgers and being one of the guys hanging out with his offensive lineman, basically living a frat guy lifestyle versus avocado ice cream. Dak's doing all that stuff just without Dak's doing all that stuff just without a TB12 brand, a D4K brand that he's going gangbusters with, bringing his own trainer to the Star to try to bring the teammates on to build the brand before he gets kicked out of town. So, when you look at this thing going into the body work, then the throwing motion, right? Because you talk about the hitch in your giddy up. He's always kind of had that. He was not a classic pretty thrower of the football, he wasn't as bad as like a Randall Cunningham wind-up doll, but there was a little bit of robot arm to this guy, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens and how much they do wind him up at camp, because obviously they're not going to hit him, but how many reps, how many days in a row, how many rest days, how much built-in stuff to really make sure he's ready to roll Thursday night.
I'm giving him like 2 series in the joint practice against the Rams. I'm giving him no preseason time. In all of our practices, I got him at 70%. This is basically like mental and footwork reps, and we're throwing him out there, but likely we can't risk an injury to put week 1 or anything to do with the install on a day-to-day basis in jeopardy. I think those are crucial practices from 12 days from now in Oxnard, and those 3.5 weeks, and then the 2.5 weeks back at the Star in Frisco. Like, you need every one of these moments to get this offensive coordinated to a level that you're going to have a chance, to have the deception, have the misdirection, and have the blocking schemes lined up perfectly so everybody can be on the same page. Like, you're not just talking about changing to a new offense. You're talking about going to an offense that's never had any sort of actual foothold inside the Cowboys culture, inside the Star. These coaches have never tried it. Schottenheimer's basically trusting a college coach and the offensive line coach from the Arizona Cardinals to come in here and compete, install, execute, game plan, all of that stuff on an NFL elite level. That's a huge ask. And to try to do that without your quarterback. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I want dude on ice. I want him at every practice, moving around, but not exerting himself at any time.
What I'm really interested to see is the bye's week 10, right? And then 12 through 17 is the big gauntlet. They got the Raiders coming out of the bye, and then 12 through 17 is the stretch everyone's talking about. And then Giants week 18, hopefully they have it wrapped up, but the whole thing could be on the line, conference or division, even the playoffs. And when you look at this and you think about 9-10 weeks in a row, And then you think about how the schedule gets it's not just 12 through 17 and who they play, it's when and how they play them. There's 4-11, 5-12. There's crazy condensed stretches. And what I was thinking about a lot at the end of the NBA playoffs, when all these guys are popping Achilles, they talk about having calf issues and then they pop their Achilles. You go back to Kevin Durant was probably the most famous one. Is I wonder what happens week 7, week 13, and on a quick turnaround, if he's got calf tightness, do they sit him down for a week and come out with Joe Milton and give him an extra, 8 to 10 days? Because you start talking about what you're talking about, the end of this is catastrophic. The end of this is devastation. This isn't like you pull a hamstring and you're back in 4 to 6 weeks like a normal person. If this happens again, that might be the end.
Mm-hmm. It could be, absolutely. And Tony Romo had just done a deal when he got hurt preseason in 2016 that opened it up for Dak, and it was terrible. Because you had just signed Tony, so you had all of Dak's rookie year. At least the first 3 years, you're still paying off Tony Romo. And that is devastating. I think the only way this Cowboys team wins a Super Bowl is if they can have a quarterback playing at a Pro Bowl or maybe even all-pro level on his rookie deal. If you have to move on from Dak before his contract is played out and you flush the dead money, you risk mitigating what is the biggest advantage for team building in pro football, which is, that quarterback in that Brock Purdy situation.
Here's what I love the most about this. We just went doomsday and basically laid it out as simple, flat, plain, and clean as it could be. What's really great about this situation, if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, what's really great if you're Jerry Jones on down, this is a guy who had to have another surgery because he rehabbed too hard. If anybody's going to get it right, this is the guy who's wired to do so. Yes.
And he's got enough. 3 of the last 5 years have ended in injury, but in 2 of those, I think he played at least 12 games. So chances are he'll be available for the majority of the season. Chances are it won't be another catastrophic injury, but I do think it's going to be a bumpy road, and I'm interested to see what Joe Milton can do. I think
how I talk about data working for or against you. Yeah. 4 of the last 6 healthy seasons, they won the East and BTA. We know what their career records are against those other. And I know you want to talk about them being down, but this stuff is cyclical, right? Let's see what Jaden Daniels does in year 2. I hope he's great. I love the kid, and it's good for football for the I almost said Redskins, for the Commanders to be good.
Sure.
It's the Giants thing is really interesting because that defense is going to be nightmare fuel up front, and they got a lot of look. They might not be a real good offense, but nobody wants to catch Malik Neighbors and Jameis Winston on a heater, right? Nobody wants to find out if Cam Scatterbo is really that mean of a dude, like he was at ASU. There's a lot of interesting dudes, You're going to see the return of the mob guys in the stands. If we had them for,
I'll tell you, this Giants team is worthy of respect, New Bear, because of their front. Can you pressure Dak and stop the run? And if you can do that without having to blitz, I think the Giants will get their first win against Dak of his career.
Yeah, so the most interesting thing in camp, really, if you really think about it, the only thing that matters is how gnarly is this BB kid in year 2, and what did him and Booker look like moving dudes around?
Can't wait.
And beating each other up, because if Javonte Williams has anything left, if Miles Sanders can be a guy who can give you some juice, Jaden Blue can be the change of pace, and they can figure it out. And it might be, like you said, it's going to be a bumpy ride. They might have to figure it out as they go, and it might not end up being any one of those dudes. But there are a lot of teams that have gone a long way without having a Saquon Barkley to hang their hat on. There's also not a lot of 2,000-yard guys. There's when you look at the top individual seasons, most of those guys lose. Most of those guys don't end up getting it done. That's what was so special about the Saquon thing last year, and everything really came together for the Eagles, and hats off to them. You could argue that not just in the NFL, they are the pinnacle roster-building team in professional sports. The NFC East is, for years, everyone talked about where I'm at, and you talked about, Baltimore and Pittsburgh leading that charge, and, the Browns would rise up here and there, and then the Bengals got Burrow, and they go to a Super Bowl, and it was the North. And if you won the North, you had as good a shot as anybody on this side of the docket. And you're gonna have a real serious time arguing against the NFC East, I think, at the end of this year, because there shouldn't be an easy win for anyone anytime, right? And there's speed, there's length, there's dynamic players at every level for every team, and it's really just going to come down to who's able to stay healthy and who's able to put it together. And those are the things that we're still going to be talking about with Dallas all the way up to kickoff September 4th.
I cannot wait, buddy. It's a hell of a lot of fun talking football with you. You can get all of our written words, our socials, and our latest videos at howboutwow.com, where every day we talk about the Cowboys getting back to the glory days for New Bear. I'm Dawson. Till next time, how about wow?